All right, guys, the last thing I'm going to demonstrate for you is how to shade a sphere. There are lots of detailed and highly complicated ways to do it. I'm going to show you kind of an easy way, a more simplified, easy way to do it. And really, shading a sphere is probably one of the most noticeable ways that you'll be able to see how using different values will really help you to take a 2D shape and turn it into a three-dimensional form, so appear to be a three-dimensional form kind of coming off the paper. It's a useful skill because it can help you when you're drawing other things and you want to make them appear realistic. The biggest issue is first to recognize where the light source is coming from. And in this case, if I look at this sphere over here, where the highlight is, that is where, the light source is coming from. So this light source is shining down onto this sphere and it's lighting up this area here. So that will be the lightest area of the sphere. Now, as a sphere is round, so imagine that this is then curling up and around and then back away from the light source. So the further it goes back around and away from the light source, the darker that is, it gets darker down in here. Now there's also some reflected light. So down in here at the very edge where the shadow is cast, it's actually a little bit lighter here because this is reflected light from that is bouncing back and being reflected onto the sphere itself. There's some other labeling. It says here core of the shadow. So this is the darkest part of where the shadow is. And then here is where kind of our middle values happen as it's curving back and going away. All right. You can experiment by just drawing circles on your paper and changing where the light source is coming from to kind of figure out your shading. But in any type of shading with objects, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we go along with the project, is to figure out the highs and lows of what you are shading. And that way it will also help you to make it look more three-dimensional. So if I'm looking at my circle over here, it's very faint. And that's good because we don't want to see an outline, a hard line. We are creating the outline as a result of our shading. So I'm going to choose some of my softer pencils, like my 4B. I've got the HB here, 2B, and I've also grabbed, where is my 6B? I've also grabbed, I also have the 6B maybe for the darkest part. But for right now, maybe I just want to the reason we did the value scales and the fractured value sketch is that essentially this is duplicating that where we are creating a progression of dark to light, but we are doing it with a smooth transition. So what we're going to do though first is what I like to do is to create kind of the area around where the highlight is, and then just to lightly shade in the area that has the shadows on it. So again, I'm not going to draw a circle, like a distinct circle, but what I'm going to do is, another thing too is you want to think about this sphere as rounded. So when you shade, you don't want to go up and down. Think of this sphere as rounded. So think of your lines are going to, as you shade, are going to be curved, right? They can curve this way, they can curve this way, but it's all about the shading it into a curved manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up here, and I'm just adding sort of just a very light value. And then I'm sort of sketching around, just real lightly, and then coming back up in here. Okay, so then you can kind of see, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just really lightly, I'm kind of shading it like this, adding sort of that base layer of color, kind of like we did when we did our value scales. All right, so if you're following along, this is the first step. So basically, I just want you to, you might want to turn your paper. We're just adding a general light layer of shading. And again, I'm turning the paper so I can go around and back up. And then I'm also going to do it over here. Again, I'm just kind of doing it in the surrounded direction. Okay, so go ahead and fill yours in. And then once you do, we'll talk about step number 2. All right, guys, so now that we've lightly put sort of a base layer down, you can also take your finger, if you're using like a 4B, and you can kind of smooth your edges. So now I have this base coat down, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in with my 6B, and I'm going to kind of start to define this darker shadow area. So it kind of starts over here, and it curves around. Kind of down into this area right here. Okay, so then now that I've kind of defined it, I'm going back and making it a little bit darker. All right, so go ahead and do that step. We're just kind of smoothing it, creating this little bit of darker area now. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll talk about the next step. All right, so now we've done that, we can also, again, you can take your finger, you can kind of blend. Now we have this nice stripe here, and it's not blended, so we don't want to have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and kind of smooth that out as we transition. So as this goes down here, we can kind of make this imagine if you were doing your value scale or your fractured shading. This is kind of our darkest area. So again, I'm going back. I'm kind of backing off as I get closer down to the bottom, but we'll use an eraser to kind of put back in that reflected light shadow if it gets a little too dark in there. So I'm going back and I'm adding at the bottom of this shadow, I'm making it even darker. And then as I go up, I'm sort of loosening the pressure to kind of blend it. So it's darker down in here. And then as it goes around, and I'm just gradually working my way around and darkening this part of the shadow. And then trying to kind of feather it as it goes back up. And got some. This is another area where it's the darkest. So I'm making it a little bit darker still. And then I'm kind of loosening up with how much pressure I'm putting on the pencil. As I think about how this is going to kind of go up and around into the area there. So as you're working, we're just making this lower section kind of our darkest value. So again, I'm just coloring back over. And I feel like now I have a nice sort of core to this shadow here. As it then works its way up the sphere. And then I'm trying to sort of blend it into the next nearly darkest value. And just as before, we kind of want to use the edge of our pencil just gradually working my way around. All right, so go ahead and do that. Get your core shadow darkened, and then we'll talk about as we work our way back up the sphere. All right, guys, now we're gonna work on, I switched back to my to my 4B, and I'm just going to work on just cleaning up that edge a little bit. But now what we essentially want to do, I'm just kind of cleaning up this bottom part here. You can turn your paper as you work around if that helps. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to take this dark core and then start to blend it as it goes up. So again, what we're going to do is I've switched to my 4B, and I'm not pressing very, not putting a lot of pressure on the pencil. But we want to kind of transition the value from this darkest value to like the next value on our value scale. And it'll take a minute, and it's kind of like adding your layers. Kind of shading, again, I'm shading in around. It's okay if you go a little bit outside the line. You can always just clean it up with your eraser at the end. So now I'm just trying to blend. Some kind of overlapping where I color, maybe trying to smooth out that. This is kind of like that medium. Again, if you get a mark that you don't like, you can kind of sort of tamp on it with your eraser, and it kind of pulls up the lead or the graphite. And then again, I'm going from down here was my darkest. And I'm just working my way up. I'm going to try to blend that. This just takes a little bit of time. It's not something that you can go fast with, so I'm really just trying to still blend that first core dark shadow now with sort of in this area here, more in the mid section of the ball, or of the sphere. Lower shading it into, so it looks like some type of a ball, maybe a ping pong ball. And again, if I made that too dark, I'm just going to tamp on it. And you can use your finger to kind of blend it. So go ahead, play around with blending your core shadow then as you go up, and then we'll talk about, for the final step, we'll talk about the shadow and then taking away this little bit of reflected light. All right, guys, so once you, and again, I can go back and sort of fuss with this a little bit more, but once you feel pretty good about your shading in the main space, and again, if you blend too much, you can use your eraser to kind of take away a little bit. Whoops. Okay. Then we have our shadow. So I'm going to go back to my 6B because it is the darkest. And I'm going to kind of outline that. It gets a little bit lighter as it goes off to the end here. And it's not quite as dark out here. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space right here. And you're just going to go around your shadow. The darkest part of the shadow is right down in here. So this is my 6B, and it really allows me to get the darkest values that I can. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to gently lessen the pressure. And it's still dark, but not maybe quite as dark. And again, if you want to lighten up, a kneaded eraser is also good for this. I just don't happen to have one right now. But kneaded erasers are great because they can sort of smudge and pick up the graphite as well. There's my cast shadow, and I'm going to clean up around my sphere. go back and do any little tweaking I can. If you want to add the, oh, I see it's right here. Here's the line right here, or if you want to add the shading around that, you can. Now I'm just using my 4B, and I'm just kind of lightly going around, and then what you can do is you can kind of then smudge it. So again, I'm just gonna lightly go around it. I'm just gonna turn my paper. Even out my shading a little bit. So you can see this takes some time. It's not something that you can do really, really fast. That's why it's called artwork. Haha. Okay. And then once you are happy with the shadow and all of the shading, then you are finished. Okay. Oops, I realized here I want to bring this up a little bit more on the side here. I'm blending that a little bit more as it goes up. All right. So now you guys are ready for, once you complete your value scale, your fractured value sketch, and shade a sphere, then you'll be ready to start your project. All right, guys, I forgot to show you one quick thing. So for the reflected shadow, if you want to, you would take either your kneaded eraser, or if you have like a nice kind of angled eraser, you can kind of, you're just going to lightly go around this bottom edge here. To kind of add in that shadow. And the tip of my eraser was maybe a little bit too wide, but you can see kind of how I was able to add that little bit of reflection there, which also helps to make it look even more 3D. Okay,